So, I was standing with a few regular guys the other day, and one of them said, "Oh, you've got to honour the treaty." I don't think he knew what he meant. He meant honour what the politicians are telling us they want us to do under the banner of the treaty. But I'm going to take his words and see where they take us. Because maybe if we honour the treaty, we might be really honouring something valuable about ourselves. So this treaty was, let's just get a little bit more focused. Is that focused enough? Is that sharp, isn't it? Yeah. So the Treaty of Waitangi, what are we honouring? If we're going to honour this thing, it was written in Maori, translated from an English draft. The draft was written on the 4th of February, 1840. In recent decades, all government legislation recognises the supreme authority of Te Treaty of Waitangi as the founding document of our nation. Isn't that interesting? They're stuck by their words. Let's see where it's going to take us. So to honour something means to respect or abide by it. Charles? You've done it, you clever thing. So the Great Seal of New Zealand of 1841 honours Te Treaty of Waitangi. Can you see that clearly? Is it reasonably visual? It shows Queen Victoria supported by 8 loyal chiefs who are her subjects. Fascinating. The other chiefs and tribes and the people of New Zealand are included in this de facto. There's no room in the seal to put everybody, is there? Like in 1841, there might have been, let's say there was 100,000 people in New Zealand. You can't get them all in the seal here, right? So this is just the beginning of it. Now, this representation honours the agreement. It honours the agreement entered at Waitangi, and it demonstrates how the first generation here thought about their treaty. This is how the people thought about it. Let's see the next one. Wow. The nation's first coat of arms from 1911. Coat of arms, you know, the big emblem, it symbolises the whole of the country. It's got the 3 treaty partners. This is the Crown. You see, the Queen Victoria, well, she'd been replaced by the King. She'd passed away. But that's their symbol, is the British Lion holding the Union Jack. Over here's the Rangatira, representing the original chiefs and tribes who signed. And over here, this lady represents all the people of New Zealand. You see? Now, this is what people in 1911 understood of what was established in 1840. You see that? Can you actually see it? I mean, otherwise you have to start puzzling. Who is this person? Who's this woman? Well, it's all the people of New Zealand, everybody. Who's this guy here? It's the chiefs and tribes. And that is the Queen Victoria, or the king, you know, the crown they had then. Not the corporate crown, the crown treaty participant. This is very revealing. There are no 2 parties or anything. This is the actual relationship that was established at the very beginning, and everybody understood it. Everybody. This is common law. Thank you, Charles. However, Minister Matthew Rata, who lived 1934 to 97, introduced a fraud to the Parliament in 1975. He misled Parliament by stating there was an English treaty text that differed from the Maori language Te Tiriti. There was no English language treaty text that differed from Te Tiriti. However, he presented to the Parliament the Freeman Royal Style Report, which was written by Captain Hobson's secretary, James Freeman. It was a report. It was not a draft. It was not a translation. It wasn't even the treaty. It was Hobson's secretary's grandiose writing to his friends and letting them know what a wonderful thing he was part of. However, this man presented that document to the Parliament as if it were the treaty text. That is a criminal act. By law, all subsequent treaty legislation and statutes are nullified by the initial fraud, and that is our inheritance through the Magna Carta. And that portal of the treaty gives us the safety and the protection of the truth against fraudsters, liars, dissemblers, cheats, and politicians of every stripe, as long as we keep it as ours. If we let them keep it as theirs, guys like him will twist it for their own advantage. You see, in 1840, when the chiefs and tribes and all the people signed, the treaty was in Maori. That's what they signed on February the 6th. There's a small incident happened at Manukau Heads, which I'll explain to you later, but it doesn't change the facts. That's why that medallion you saw at the beginning, the Great Seal, was the way it was. The chiefs are bending down like this, right? That's why the coat of arms had all three parties together with dignity. Charles. So what is it, if we're going to honour the treaty, what is it that we value and honour? So integrity, honesty, truthfulness and accuracy are virtues that we honour. I think we'd all like that, wouldn't we, in our communications, in our dealings? However, in the social world of contradiction, we find dishonourable elements of deceit, dishonesty, lies and falsity. We just identified a deviation between the original meaning of te tiriti and the present politicised definition, which was introduced in 1975. We can pin it, we can pinpoint it exactly, because we have the record, Hansard, of the dialogue in Parliament recorded by the Parliamentary Secretary. It's all there. So the question, in recent times, has the Treaty of Waitangi been subjected to political manipulation and deliberate fraud? I think all fraud's deliberate, isn't it? If so, from the perspective of people who say, oh, they're Maori, what's the worth of Maori mana when it's based on hearsay, lies and greed? And for those who say, oh, yes, I'm a Christian or whatever, I keep with these values and all that, well, if you cut those values adrift from the underpinnings of the Ten Commandments, which came in through the portal, connected intimately with the Magna Carta, if you cut that off, what's your faith worth then? So, there's a bit of background to the treaty, which is fascinating, and I'm bringing that up because we've got an amazing story to tell for our nation, our history. It's quite fascinating. But I'm not going way, way back. I'm only going back to the 1800s. It's to save those of you who are worried in case Chris gets going back to 7,000 years ago and we start talking about the early moa hunters and all that. We'll leave that for later. So in the early 1800s, historic changes came to New Zealand. Why? Because European civilization and Maori tribal society began to interact here. Very interesting time. Travel, trade, technology, new ideas, opportunities arose. Why? People learned about each other's worlds. They could they built little sailing boats, you could sail over to Sydney, take your pork, your potatoes, whatever, over there and trade them. Kauri spas, it got very interesting. Now, Christianity, Western civilization, the law and education entered these islands. People forget that many Maori, very smart young people often, had travelled to Europe, to Sydney. They'd learned. They'd seen the world. Just imagine in England, they met people from Jamaica. They said, oh, what's up, man? Dreadlocks, whatever. Not there yet. But in Jamaica, they had sugar plantations and slavery. In New Zealand, the only slaves are the ones owned by the tribes. Interesting, eh? So, they observed, experienced, and advanced civilization. Imagine that as a bit like Star Wars, eh? Going to another planet. So all groups expanded their communications, and with the mingling came intermarriage. Very interesting, because you got the birth of a new people. New Zealand is of part European, part Maori heritage. The first of the new South Pacific Islanders, you might say. So, in the early 1800s, New Zealand was a lawless frontier. How many of you heard about the American Wild West and cowboys and Indians, all that stuff? We had just the same excitement here. We had it all in full blast, South Pacific style. No cowboys and Indians. Things were pretty wild. So there were several hundred chiefs and tribes operating under this tribal law system, which was pretty, how should we say, you could call it the rule of the jungle or unruly. The tikanga was a pre-Old Testament system of mano, utu and tapu and muru operating through the chiefs, and their tribal society practiced warfare, cannibalism, and slavery. By 1840, there was about 2,000 Europeans had settled here, roughly. Who were they? What sort of people? They were sealers, whalers, escaped Sydney convicts, bloody Aussies, traders, adventurers, land speculators, settlers, and of course visitors, people who might come and stay for a few years and move on. There was no standard of law. Anything goes, and the next slide will show us, I think. Whoa, how many of you have ever been up to Russell, which was once known as Kororareka? Russell, Bay of Islands. Do you know what that place was? The hellhole of the South Pacific, people. In 1830 alone, there was 3,000 whaling ships through there because they called it the Southern Whale Fishery. The sperm whales, the right whales, the blue whales, they were all down there, virgin territory. These were boats coming down from America through Australia and some from Britain. So at any time, Kororareka's brothels sold women and liquor to some 400 sailors. Who provided the women? Was it white people? No. The Maori chiefs provided the women. They taxed the ships. They were running a taxation racket. If you brought your ship in, the chief would paddle out and say, I need some money. And the sailors provided the lawlessness, and of course, traders provided alcohol to keep everything moving along just smoothly. There's a lot of history about Russell. There was the Women's War, the whole town got burned. Look, you just get into that, it's as wild as you can get. And this, can you imagine how the missionaries felt at night praying? Please stop the lawlessness, because it was a bad example. They're trying to teach the local Maori folk Christian life, and down there's all the sailors and the Maori girls, and everybody's drunk and having an endless party on the beach. So civilized people were horrified, absolutely horrified at this carry on. Next thing going on at the same time are the musket wars. The musket wars, oh my gosh, when you read this stuff, yeah, it is both thrilling and shocking. So the military technology came through trade. Tribal leaders like Hongi Hika quickly accessed muskets to better implement their mana-driven campaigns of utu. They had traditional resentments and fights with others, and this got them going big time, because now they had the means to take on their rivals and their enemies over any upset they imagined. Now, New Tirani was the translation of New Zealand into Maori. Eh? So the advent of muskets brought chiefs and tribes to an arms race. They had an arms race here. You've heard about the nuclear arms race. We had a genuine musket arms race, and it took till about 1830 before the balance of arms among the tribes, everyone had enough muskets to protect themselves. Now, over many military campaigns, these are called a tawa. The warriors killed and ate some 30% of the tribe's people and decimated and depopulated many areas. Taranaki was cleaned out. Everybody took off. Parts of the Waikato. Auckland Isthmus was devoid of humanity. Whole areas were devastated. You need to see the maps. There were some of the largest war parties had 2,000 warriors. Now, if 2,000 warriors besieged a pa and slaughtered 500 people, that's 3 warriors per body. That's quite a lot of eating, isn't it? Now, I'll do questions at the end if you like. Yeah. Because this has got to roll through here. So while up the front the warriors are fighting the pa with the muskets, the slaves down the back are heating up the ovens, and the dead bodies are being passed back to be cooked for dinner that night. Europeans were drawn into this warfare as they sought to both protect and arm their Maori friends and calm down the tribalist, Utu-driven genocidal campaigns. You'll hear these guys saying, colonialists, they armed the Maoris against each other. I tell you what, the missionaries were even dealing in guns. Can you imagine the shock and horror? How hypocritical were those terrible missionaries? Can you imagine being a missionary, say, down in, just make it up, Bay of Plenty, or down south, down in the Taranaki, down in the Manawatu, right? And you've been working there for quite a few years, and you've got your tribal people and you love them, and they don't have any guns. And suddenly guys come over the hills with guns and start slaughtering and killing and eating your people. What are you going to do? Well, especially when they come to your door at night and say, please help us get some muskets, because without the muskets, what are we going to be eating? This is the case. This is what happened here. This is the terrible dilemma that a lot of people found themselves in, early settlers, and what they call the Pākehā Maori. This is a fascinating story about the people who live with the tribes. So this is the famous brown bess musket that was being used. You saw it in the earlier video about the Waterloo, right? Very effective, very effective. The first tribal people who I heard down where I grew up in the Upper Hutt, when they saw that, they didn't know what these things were. They saw the thin point end being pointed at them. The Maoris had weapons where they had a club end on some of the staffs, like that. They couldn't understand why the thin end of the weapon was being pointed, because usually you use the broad end to fight with. And they said, but what's that? And then next thing, bang, they found out very quickly what the thin end of the pointy end of the musket did. Blew them to pieces, right? So you can imagine taking on with 1,000 guys, and among them you've got, for example, when Hongi Hika got over to Rotorua to take on the Mokoia Island with his 1,200 warriors, they had, I think, something like 500 muskets, and there was one musket among the 1,000 people, warriors on Mokoia Island, right? One. And the guys coming in had 1,000, right? What are the odds? Very interesting. Hongi Hika was wearing a steel helmet given to him by the King of England. Some brave soul saw on the island with a solitary musket, saw Hongi Hika's head coming up through the mist on the canoe, and fired and got him bong on the head, and Hongi Hika fell back in the canoe, feeling very, very dizzy. But he had on the steel helmet the king gave him, right? He popped up again and the war's back on, right? This is an amazing story. Musket wars. Now, here we go. Can you see these guys dancing? Are they dancing? What are they doing? What's this about? Can you see their faces? Can you see how ferocious that is? So what's this haka thing about? What's this haka about? I'm going to kill you and eat you. Why is it such a wonderful thing that we have this at rugby games? And it's a ferocious, terrible, cannibalistic chant. There's nothing nice about the haka. It's a horrid thing. Believe what?
I'd like to know where you get this information from.
Of course you would. You have to read the book and do a lot of homework. Carry on. There's a lot of it. Oh, just we'll get there. Where did you come from? I'll help you have the facts. So here we go. Christianity and missionary activity. So when they began to teach the tribes about the Bible and so on, there was a tremendous interest in this. The missionary printing press distributed tens of thousands of Bible extracts, and these went all over the country. People were learning to read and teaching each other. Fascinating. Imagine reading the Old Testament and you're looking at the campaigns of the Israelite and Hebrew kings and seeing how they fought off the enemy. You might need some of that information. Sometimes they were studying the Bible for strategic military reasons because they were smart people. There was a lot going on, you understand, many levels. So the missionaries avidly and sincerely studied the Maori language. That's why they were able to translate the treaty so accurately. They lived, in the case of the missionaries who did the treaty itself, they'd lived here 17 years, and the son was raised from age 3. He was completely bilingual. They wrote the first Maori dictionary. They knew the language better than any scholar nowadays, better than any of these academics that are busy telling us what to think. So, despite the lawless frontier culture, the Christian influence spread steadily through the country on many levels. Charles? Yeah. So this is, you see here Samuel Marsden giving his sermon up in Northland. It profoundly influenced the formation of New Zealand society. Now, the security and protection was building up all the time because there'd been some things happened. For example, some of the northern tribes had been involved in the massacre of Marion Dufresne, and about 20 of his sailors were killed and eaten. Terrible. The Boyd catastrophe and other violent incidents. The tribes were worried in case Europeans came back retribution with ships and cannon. They were worried that things might get worse. There was genuine reasons for wanting help. Busby, particularly James Busby, notified the British authorities of the need to institute law and order because he was busy trying to quell all the upset in the north. The muskets and all the upset, the drunken sailors, the whalers, the grog, the prostitution. It was just getting out of hand. So the authorities in England got a lot of letters, help, we need to sort this out. And they were going, do we need another place? They had so many countries to look after. The musket wars unsettled everybody. The violence, cannibalism and attacks by Maori on Maori and on Europeans could be stopped only by a more powerful authority than tribalist tikanga. There had to be a higher, more powerful order to shut this down because the chiefs couldn't stop it among themselves. There was no way. Utu, such a powerful so-called spiritual force amongst them. And there was a risk of the French turning up, attempting to colonise the place. So the Utu-fueled musket wars tore apart tribal society. Unrestrained slaughter. This is quite an interesting book by John Robinson, deeply researched Maori musket wars. You can read Crosby's Musket Wars. I should have brought that tonight. There's been quite a lot of deep research. I've identified about 60 books written on the subject by people who either lived at the time or knew reports of people who survived it. There's a whole range of books right through to about the 1930s or 40s, quite reliable. And then we find the rot sets in the 70s, all this revisionist, cultural Marxist nonsense, trying to rewrite our history and change the story. Now, the treaty, I told you it was a portal. It offered everybody an acceptable solution, and it was honourable solution too, because the chiefs and everybody had a way to accept peace, order and lawfulness. Funnily enough, there were quite a few of the what we call the Pākehā Maori, white guys who lived in Maori tribes who were trading, who were not very happy about this treaty, but not one of them ever said that it was dishonourable, duplicitous, manipulative, or dishonest, or anything like that. They just didn't want to lose their wild lifestyle. Just imagine having 3 or 4 wives, everything you wanted, lots of trade, everyone thought you were a hero. Every time a ship came in, you got to deal with the captain, and you had a whole tribe backing you. And occasionally you got to taste human flesh. That was their life. So British authorities planned this treaty offer. They had it all worked out. They wanted lawful governance according to the highest principles of civilised rule, Christian morality and human concern. You can read their instructions to Captain Hobson and their policy documents on the matter. Now, Captain Hobson greeted the treaty signers at the time and said, "We are one people now," when they'd signed the treaty. So the whole thing was moving to a whole new level. You see, chiefs and tribes, people of New Zealand, Queen Victoria, all one people. There's Captain Hobson. He represented the sovereignty of Queen Victoria and British common law to both Maori and Pākehā alike. He was a hero. He was a fighter in the Caribbean against slavery. He'd had a very adventurous life, tracking down slavers in the Caribbean. That's where he got sick. He got either yellow fever or malaria. He was very ill when he came here. He only survived 2 years before he died, a young man. I think he was just 40. Now, he had instructions to present the Treaty of the Chief and Tribes only expressed according to their established usages. You understand? This was not an imposition. This was according to their established usages. That's why the language, the debates, and everything was conducted in Maori. And he acted with sincerity, mildness, and justice, and he did indeed. Now, the British authorities stepped in, finally. They were reluctant. They had their own reasons to be reluctant. They had enough administration. They had places all over the world. They had an empire. Why would they want to take on these southern islands full of wild characters? Just another lot of headaches. But they decided they would do it the right way. And if the people accepted it, it was according to the international standards of treaties. This whole thing was set up properly. And the process of civilization was going to take time, goodwill from all parties, and bring new social conditions for all. And it was to be administered by British representatives. Now, the Maori proceedings were to give full consent and full understanding to everybody who participated. There was a lot of debate, a lot of discussion, a lot of posturing and jumping around and rhetoric, but in the end, 500 of them signed. So they moved from this wild thing to another direction, but it was going to take a long time to transform. It wasn't just overnight. You can't just change it, centuries of customs like that. So, Charles, the participants at the signing of Te Treaty, now we used that image for the cover of our book. You see, they're signing it, and you've got the people of New Zealand, and you've got the representatives of the Queen, and you've got the chiefs and tribes, but we put it under the flame because in modern times they've attempted to burn up our treaty and destroy it. And on the back we've got an image where we've been cut out of the process. The people of New Zealand have been cut out of our own process by those who were elected to serve us. Let's talk about the document of 1840. And I put it next to these sort of classic images of buildings and Parliament because it's coming here. So there's only one version, Te Treaty of Waitangi, despite what's in the Parliament. There were 3 participants. There was no such thing as a partnership or any little business deal or, the crown in Maori. That sort of nonsense is not there. It's Queen Victoria, the chiefs and tribes, all the people of New Zealand. These people joined in a common law pact. We've been hearing about common law because they're people, not persons. They're not statutory entities, not like iwi corporations that we've got playing around now with this treaty. They were people. And that's what the Magna Carta and the Bible and the Bill of Rights, all this material, all these documents are all about being people. So we are constituted as a people. You see, that's our freedom. Now, the document was expertly translated from its English draft into Maori by the bilingual Anglican missionaries, Henry and Edward Williams. Their translation occurred on the 5th of February, the signing took place on the 6th. So the English draft was written on the 4th, the translation's on the 5th, the signing was on the 6th. It was all choreographed because everybody was coming to Waitangi to get involved. And you've got to get all your work done. It took a lot of effort to get this sorted out because Captain Hobson only arrived about 13 days before that from Sydney on his boat. And there were 7 official signings afterwards around the country, and everyone had lots of opportunity to discuss before they went into the terms. Now, this is what the original version they used at Waitangi, okay, that particular, was written on dogskin parchment. We presume it was a Maori dog. And I was studying about them. They're fascinating creatures. There's a whole story about the whole Maori cloaks, you know, the dogskin cloaks and so on. But you see, when storage, after the thing had been signed, these are the signatures, everyone thought that's it, that was done, and later it was rolled up and put in a storage and rats ate it. I mean, that was how important people thought, we just move on, we'll have a country, that's just done now, we all know what we're doing. Until 1975. Yeah, let's go on. Now, let's talk, there's a lot of, I'm not going to go through every single document because there are quite a few. And these are used by the politicians and by the academics and by the mischief makers to confuse and bamboozle the Kiwi population. So we've got, I'm just going to give you the fundamental ones. The real one is Te Treaty of Waitangi, written in Maori, 6th, 18 February. The real source document signed by representative the Queen, blah, blah, all the people. Now, the real one was James Busby's Littlewood Treaty draft of 4th February. This was the one that was used to, I think I might have, I've got a copy here. Okay, this book by Martin Dutre, you see that that handwriting on the cover? That is actually the original draft, the Littlewood draft that was used written drafted on the 4th February, on the 5th of February it was used for the translation work, okay? That wasn't signed, you understand, it was a draft. Now, there's a bogus one we talked about, the Royal Style reports, and he did about 7 or 8 of those, all beautifully handwritten. These are neither draft nor translations, they're misleading pastiches, passed into the Treaty of Waitangi Act 1975 by Matthew Rata. Now, we also have the real version, the official government translation of 1869 done by T.W. Young, and that's accurate as well. You see, they had no agenda in 1869. There was no iwi corporations. There was no Waitangi Tribunal. There was no mischief going on. None of this monkey business. Oh, Professor Hugh Kafuru's 1985 English version is a real crock and it's clever. You wouldn't pick it unless you'd done the scholarship. He is so sly. Misleading. See that word subtle? What does subtle mean? You know in Genesis it says the serpent was the most subtle of all the creatures? Deceitful, tricky, slimy. Kafuru was a traitor to the nation. And his version was used to justify the 1987 appeal court case where the Maori Council manipulated the legal system to support and back up their dirty deeds. Very interesting when you get into this stuff. This is clever legal minds tricking the population. So we've got real stuff and fake stuff. So let's honour the meaning of the Treaty of Waitangi. Let's honour it. The real one, I mean. Let's get it back. Let's honour it. It's ours. It's a common law document. British rule of law, the Bible. It's integral with the Bible and its 10 Commandments. It flows through. You know, don't murder. Stop the war. So we are all sovereign, you see, under this treaty. The people are sovereign, not the Parliament, not the iwi corporation, not the tribes, not the so-called kamatua. Everybody is sovereign because we're free men and women under this rule. Now, it allows the legislative body to become, because the treaty says, you know, we're going to be British subject, so we need a proper British system. So that was introduced very quickly. The treaty was signed on the 6th of February, the first one. All the documents got to London by, I think it was about September, October. All the legislative documents and the warrant came back here, and I've got a copy of it here. It was just, this is Queen Victoria's Royal Charter and Letters Patent, arrived here March 1841. Captain Hobson, by May 1841, had formed the first Legislative Council. See how quick they were to try and help settle things down. So it establishes that all New Zealanders have the rights and obligations of British subjects, which includes loyalty to the Queen and country, which is why you saw those chiefs bowing to the Queen. Respect for established traditions, including the right by trial by jury of peers. We must never surrender that. If we lose that, boy, things go bad real quick. So it can only be what it is, a unifying agreement, nothing else. It's not a legal commercial contract. It doesn't establish a two-party partnership. It doesn't recognise the state overruling individual rights, or political or corporate exploitation. It doesn't belong to the Labour Party or the National Party, eh? No special privileges or statutory recognition for anyone. All this stuff is anti-treaty, the stuff going on around us. The treaty's biblical principles reject Marxism, secular humanism, globalism, moral relativism, and any other non-Christian, non-Bible-based system of rule, philosophy, or political order. How do you like that? That's right there, front and centre. And these so-called spiritual people can't see this stuff. They're dummies. It does not introduce or sanction co-governance, race-based separatism, tribal rule, rangatiratanga, and tikanga in any way, shape, or form, ever. Now, how many of you know about the great prophet T.W. Ratana? You've got to know about him. He's really important to our nation. Okay, so he was a wonderful and special Maori prophet. He was very active from about 1912 to about 1940 when he passed away. A man worthy of respect. He was a bit like a Martin Luther King ahead of his time in New Zealand, if you know what I mean. And what did he say? He said, with the treaty in one hand and the Bible in the other. Right? That he went to every marae in the country. At one stage, he influenced directly nearly 40% of people of Maori descent who at that time were only either half or quarter blood. How is it that all these spiritually tuned in people can't see this? This is the facts. This is historical. This isn't something I made up. You go and do the homework, you'll find this. This is a substantial business. Now, these are the symbols. This is the Ratana Church, and there's other matters here, the Mount Taranaki and so on. We won't go into that. But all the people from 1840 until the 1970s claims of the Treatyists recognised and accepted that Te Tiriti's principles are those of the Bible and the British common law. Those are the principles. Not tikanga, not cultural Marxism, not capitalism, none of that. So under British common law, you've got the 10 Commandments. Now, in case you don't realise, everybody in the courtroom, they swear on the Bible, don't they? Why? Why do we swear on the Bible? Because it's baked into the whole system. It's integral with everything. To pretend it ain't is to ignore the fact that we've been swearing on the Bible since, well, possibly Magna Carta, possibly earlier. Isn't this amazing? Why didn't the school kids get taught this business? Why don't the churches teach it? What's happened to their spirituality? What's happened to their values? So, one of the, just flick that back a second. This one's important. You shall not murder. People thought it was they shall not kill, but it's actually don't murder. The Bible understands sometimes killings happen, in war and stuff. But murder is different. Murder is a premeditated, cold, ruthless exploitation of someone else's life and destruction of it. So these are all, we'll roll forward, we're going to touch on these quickly. Yeah, Charles, how are we doing here? Right. So how many of you know of Sir Apirana Ngata? Amazing scholar, amazing jurist. He was also a great reviver of Maori traditions, including a few hakas. But he was a man who said that Te Tiriti, the way it is, the chiefs surrender their sovereignty, get over it. We are living in a new age. Amazing guy. His equal has not been found. Matthew Rard is not equal to this guy, neither are any of these creeps. Willie Jackson, Nanaia Mahuta. Not one of them could hold a candle up to this guy. Hugh Kafaru, not even worthy to polish this man's shoes. He was a statesman, a man of great class and dignity. So, this 1940 Treaty Centennial plaque on One Tree Hill, you go up there, you can see it, recognises that the Maoris surrender of their chiefly sovereignty to the British Crown and get the rights of British subjects. It's all there. You can go. I took that photo. I'm a little bit proud of it. But I took me 4 or 5 different visits to get the light right up there. But it's on the top of the hill. That 1940 centenary. It celebrates this matter. Everybody knew it. Everybody understood it. Now, I'm just going to talk about dishonouring and dishonouring, you see, a quick one. We've got those 10 commandments down one side. Let's follow the logic. Have no other gods before me. Well, what's this Papatūānuku nonsense going on? Huh? Animism, paganism, Tahunganism, all this nonsense.
It's all part of God.
No, it ain't. Sorry, you've got to do your study. It doesn't fit in.
No, it does.
It's another God you're talking about.
No,
you don't know. We'll talk about it later. I'll show you how it works. You don't understand. Okay, no idols, carved totem poles, makutu, hedonism. It's all part of God, is it? No way. Yahweh and Heavenly Father are the correct names for God. Io atua are misleading names. They dishonour the biblical meaning. Honour your father and mother. So the Treatyist claims exclusive Maori indigenous identity which dishonour a person's mixed race parentage. Because if you've got 2 bloodlines mixed in you and you dishonour one, you just say, oh, I'm from, I'm a Maori, this and that, these days. What about the other side of your family? You're not honouring your parents. And yet the treaty says, these are the ways we go forward. Both parents are important. Shall not murder. So we're going back to Utu, you know, this is what's going on now. You shall not commit adultery. We've got this illegitimacy, social welfare mothers, this whole crazy breakdown in family life. Shall not steal. Fake treaty settlements that plunder assets of the people of New Zealand. Stealing our stuff. Iwi Corporation. Then you shall not give false testimony against your neighbour. These fabricated stories about British colonisers, cultural Marxist narratives. You know, all these claims and lies about colonialists were so cruel and they did terrible things. You heard this stuff? I'm still recovering from my colonialist ancestors' experience. For goodness sake, this is bearing false witness. These are lies. You shall not covet anything that belongs to your neighbour. What about stealing people's stuff? And the Rangatira class these days, not sharing any of these so-called settlements with everyone else, keeping the lands for themselves and not dividing them and separating them and giving them to the people of descent. Really? So the treatyists' advances always dishonour our treaty. Every time the treatyists meaning corporate iwi, lawyers who are making money out of this business, the politicians who are playing these games, all these creeps, every time they take a step forward, they dishonour our treaty. And they're traitors to the nation. There's a lot of data here. But we've got, since that 1975 Act, they've opened the door to globalists and all kinds of other invasion by these other elements. This James Freeman report was the pivot. Without that in there, they couldn't justify their lies because the James Freeman report is not a treaty. It's got other information, other language in it. I'm not going into it right now. So the treatyist ideology is cultural Marxism, and they want to dominate through political power, plunder our assets, and conceal their crimes. That's really important that they hide their crimes. And one of the best ways is to make each of us feel guilty and make the school children unaware of their real history and to keep this pressure up all the time to destroy the integrity in the community. Really essential part of their game. And manufactured division and disunity of the people based on racial ancestry and grievance and destruction of social capital. So you can see they control the narrative and manipulate its meaning. They work to destroy our history. They control the academia, the courts, and all of this other stuff. Now, we can reclaim our nation and our government by honouring our treaty. We can. It's up to us to wake up and get this figured out. Because the original treaty unifies us. And to honour it is to live by the principle of the Ten Commandments and the morality of the British common law. Isn't that an amazing breakthrough? There's the principles that the most high-paid judges in the country couldn't figure out. They couldn't figure out these principles. Sir Geoffrey Palmer, Lord Robin Cook, all these guys. And so we've got, the right to normal family life and right to justice through our High Court juries. We must reject and banish all that dishonours Te Treaty, including cultural Marxism, tikanga, dictatorial rangatiratanga, treaty partnership, all the stuff. United Nations, indigeneity politics, globalism, papatūānuku, there's a beauty, animism, immorality and racial separatism. We already have the means to resist, to reject and defeat tyranny, to banish tyrants, and I'm sure we can think of a few tyrants already. I'm going to come and inject every one of you, door to door, right? I'm the one source of truth, right? All this stuff, eh? To live peacefully and assert our sovereignty as one nation under God. This is our business. When we grasp this, they can't stop us because it's ours, you see. They pretended it was theirs. They got everybody confused. Interesting, eh? That's the end there, isn't it? So thank you for that.